So we are now live. Well, I just wanted to open with, welcome to everyone to the first Pulse on the Principles live roundtable workshop. So for those of you who have been in the community for a while, Pulse on the Principles has been a series of podcasts and webinars that we've been undertaking for the past 2 years. But after listening to a lot of the feedback from the community, as well as our advisory council, we really wanted to open up this forum to be more of discussion-based, where we can share common trends, challenges, and successes with one another, and really open up the community to be a platform where we can, learn from one another. So I'm really pleased to just open up our first roundtable series with the Digital Public Goods Charter. And so this is an effort that Dial, my team, has been co-leading with the Digital Public Goods Alliance. And so looking at the registration form and survey that had gone around when you registered for the event, it was pretty evenly split in half, that half of you knew what a digital public good, digital public infrastructure work was versus not. But that being said, we all, I think, in some way have interacted with DPGs and open source technologies in our line of work. So this is just really the next step in understanding, what are the new opportunities and risks, and how can you really help us forge the path forward for creating this charter. But with that being said, I'm really pleased to introduce my colleagues, Victoria Wellborn and Chrissy Meyer, who have been really stewarding the DPG Charter work at Dial. And I will pass it over to them to give a brief presentation over what exactly the charter work is. And hopefully that will help then inform the discussion and some of the whiteboarding exercises that we'll be doing. And in case we haven't met yet, I'm Claudine, and I'm the manager for the digital principles at Dial. So happy to really be connected and have the chance to chat with you, all of you, live here. Thank you. So I will pass it over perhaps to Victoria, then Chrissy.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Victoria Wellborn, as Claude mentioned, and we are really excited to meet with you today. Just before we kind of get into an overview of what the charter is, this conversation is happening simultaneously with a series of other conversations with practitioners, government, academia, civil society, a variety of different stakeholders that have either an experience with digital public infrastructure, DPGs, digital public goods, or an awareness of just open source technologies in general, who might be curious to be learning more. And so what these consultations are aiming to specifically do is to feed into a substantial white paper, similar to a policy paper also, that's going to be informing kind of in landscaping where the DPI ecosystem is and where the needs are, and where, if funding were to come through, where we should be looking at kind of investing some of those funds. And you should have all received, many of you probably received an email from a colleague of ours, Nicholas, who is working on this white paper document. He did a call for literature. So to really get a good landscaping of where the DPI literature has been and what work has already been done, so we're not duplicative. And I just want to say at the onset, that literature review is informing the white paper, but the substance of this white paper is coming out of conversations like today, what we're having. So thank you all so much for being here. I'll turn it over to my colleague Chrissy to also give an overview of what the charter is and its intentions. Over to you, Chrissy.
Great. Thanks, Claudia and Claudia. And Victoria, I want to apologize in advance. I am in a coffee shop, so there's a bit of background noise. And I won't take too much of your time. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm new to the charter effort, so Victoria and the team have really been shepherding it to date, but I will be kind of the main, point of contact going forward. So hope to engage with many of you. I think the charter is really an effort to say, as we as a community increasingly see the importance of digital public infrastructure for governments. We know that governments have a choice when they go to build out that infrastructure, and we want to make sure that open source is a viable option. In many ways, the market for open source is to some extent broken, it's challenging, it's not as clear cut as kind of the proprietary approach or kind of the build it yourself approach. And while we want to make sure that countries always have the option to do what fits their needs and what's most relevant to them, we also want to really make sure that they have a choice and that they understand the benefits of open source technologies, or at least taking an open approach to standards, APIs, et cetera, and the impact that can have on spurring private sector innovation and as driving those solutions down to the kind of individual person that we all really hope to impact at the end of the day. So the charter is really, an advocacy campaign that hopes to bring a lot more stakeholders on board, make sure that donor money that flows into this is flowing in the right places, as Victoria mentioned, and hoping that we can help to broker some partnerships and really push people to maybe think bigger or connect with the right people to make some more systemic change. So we'll be gathering commitments over the next year to 18 months. And so you'll hear a lot more about that. But I will pass it back over to Fad now. Thanks a lot.
Great.
Happy to take any questions as well.
Yeah, so if you have questions for Chrissy or Victoria, please drop it in the chat. But just wanted to, again, go over a little bit more context before we hop into discussion. So Chrissy already touched on it briefly, but why a digital public goods charter? So DPGs at their core really allow for, reuse of verified, safe and secure digital public infrastructure, saving governments costs, increasing effectiveness of investments, and really fostering cooperation. And so we really see how DPGs, DPIs really embrace the values that the principles, try to emulate, and really forge that path forward for how we pool investments and understand, what is a good digital project or solution. So the charter really, at its core, is a coordinated effort among actors, as Chrissy mentioned, to mobilize investments, to increase country capacity, to enable, better legal, regulatory, policy frameworks, look at sustainable sources of funding, create like a great ecosystem, much like the principles of vendors and services that are, again, verified, being like safe and secure, and to enable thriving software communities. So Victoria, don't mean to put you on the spot, but maybe, we've been throwing around a lot of terms like DPG, DPI. Could you break down for our participants really quick, perhaps some of the key differences between the two and how they interact with one another?
I am going to turn it over to Chrissy to give a better definition than I do. I will say that DPGs, for those of you who are also kind of familiar with the Digital Public Good Alliance and their standard for DPGs, really it refers to a software that has to be open source, whereas DPIs, they, if you're familiar with the DIAL's GovStack initiative, the infrastructure layer does not necessarily have to be an open source technology. And the DPGs oftentimes plug into and can sit on top of a DPI. So, I think DPGs oftentimes, I like to think of it as an individual product, whereas a DPI, it's oftentimes identity, payments, and it's kind of an infrastructure that also looks at more of a whole government approach in an ideal scenario. But Chrissy, let me turn it over to you to also kind of dive deeper into both distinguishing the DPG and the DPI.
Sure, thanks, Victoria. I think that's a good definition. I mean, I will preface this by saying these are not exact terms where everybody in the world knows exactly what they mean. And if you don't, then you are behind. So just so you know, like the definitions, they are written here at the same time. people that are living and breathing this every day don't necessarily align on the exact definitions. That being said, digital public infrastructure is really that core underlying government. Sometimes it's referred to as the stack or the layers. Someone recently at a conference said, infrastructure is there. It's not interesting if it's just by itself, right? No one cares about identity unless you can actually get services and access to things based on the fact that you have that ID, right? Having an ID in and of itself is not interesting. And so I think that's one of the differences is that core infrastructure. And again, sometimes digital public goods can serve as that infrastructure layer. So if you think of like a MOSIP, or which is an identity layer, and that is a certified digital public good. Mojo Loop is a certified digital public good that would provide the payments layer within a public infrastructure stack. But digital public goods can also sit on top of that stack. So it could be, there's already an identity system in the country, and we're going to use an open source health app to manage all of the community healthcare workers in the country, right? So the digital public goods are just inherently follow this set of open source standards, whereas the infrastructure doesn't necessarily inherently follow standards. Honestly, DPI can be good or bad. So can digital public goods. None of these are inherently good. But what we're trying to get to is what part of this digital public goods, what part of taking this open approach can really make sure that digital public infrastructure is good, that it is safe, it's inclusive, it's open, so that we can spur that innovation that we want to drive solutions down to kind of end users. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Chrissy. Quick question in the chat from Sebastian. Sebastian, do you want to unmute yourself quickly and pose this question for everyone?
Thanks a lot for the opportunity, indeed, because on the definition more and more, there's a questions about countries, government developing digital twins. And I was just wondering whether they qualify as a digital public infrastructure.
Chrissy or Nick, I see that you're also in the chat. Or in the room. I don't know if I don't have a quick answer for that. I don't know, Chrissy or Nick, if you do.
Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry. Oh, Chrissy, you can go. Sorry.
Yeah, I know. I was going to say the same thing. The question is digital twins. How do they fit in?
That's right.
Not being an expert on digital twins, I would say it doesn't necessarily fit straight into either definition. It might be like it's a different concept that we would have to kind of have a conversation as to when and how it was relevant. But I don't know, Nick, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think we can discuss it more offline, but yeah, that's my initial inclination as well.
All right. So that's a quick and dirty overview of DPGs, DPIs. And so I don't want everyone to feel like you would necessarily have to be an expert on what that is, but just from what you've known and knowing your work, thinking about like the different risks, opportunities that this charter or like the push for DPGs might present to your work. So Victoria already mentioned this, but throughout the process, we're going from consultation to endorsements of the charter to pledges. So right now we're really still in like that consultation phase. We're really trying to understand, again, how DPGs can help you all and how might it make your work harder? Some things that we just should consider. So that's really what's going to be at the heart of our discussion today. So who else are we engaging in the process? So this is the Digital Principles community, but there will be other roundtables with other different groups, with government, civil society, academia. I believe Victoria held one with some policymakers yesterday, but we're really trying to understand how this can be collective action and move beyond just digital development or humanitarian programs generally and make it a little bit broader. So we're going to move into now finally discussion, the fun piece of it. So I would like everyone just to take a few moments to go through the questions about the current state and understanding of open source technologies. So I'll start with the first question. What DPGs or open source systems do you have, build, or use? And so just to get your brains kind of going about that, as well as who or what other organizations do you work with when you're building, maintaining, or implementing DPGs. So if you have any immediate thoughts, please use the raise hand. And for those of you who might be a little bit shy or do better with just written word, I'll be dropping a Miro link into the chat so you can just put your thoughts down there. So just take a few moments to go through these questions and think through them, and then use the raise hand if you have any thoughts. Okay, so as you are thinking, I'm just going to go perhaps in like a round robin first, just to get the conversation going, and just go with the first person on my screen just to share some reflections about the current state and your understanding of open source tech. So I see Serkan Holat on the line. Do you have any, how are you using DPGs or open source systems currently?
Hi, Claudia. Well, I'm a freelance software developer, and in my work, in my freelance work, when I'm working for a company, we are always using open source software as a base to start building our applications. So it's quite crucial for my profession in general, let's say. But aside from that, I'm quite interested in this topic. So I wanted to join to this meeting to see, what is the general trend and what are we trying to do, what are we trying to achieve. But that's basically mainly related to my work.
Okay. Are there any specific open source systems that you have or building or use currently?
We are using a JavaScript framework like Angular, or we are using Microsoft Systems, .NET Core. Those are the biggest ones, I would say. I mean, these are, of course, financed by large companies, so they don't have maybe problems in being sustainable, but yeah, of course, within our stack, there are a lot of smaller open source software packages, etc. Yeah, as a software engineer, it's definitely part of my work to utilize open source software.
All right, thank you, Serkan.
No problem.
Yeah. And then so I see maybe my colleague Nick Gates. Do you have like an overview of maybe what you're finding so far in like the white paper literature review? Maybe give people some examples of other DPGs or open source systems that might be used right now.
I don't know how many specific examples I can give, but I'll reflect briefly on one experience. So Dial's doing some work with UNDP, and we've been interviewing product owners in their country offices. And I think one of the big lessons there has been that a lot of people are using tools for which there's actually an open source alternative already. So there's a number of different, I think, projects where I don't think the people involved fully understood kind of the landscape before they went in and designed the project. So they end up using, I guess, tools or frameworks that they don't necessarily need to. So for me, one of the big lessons is kind of, mapping and the availability of alternatives. And there's also a lot of commonalities. I think some of the biggest use cases we saw were for specific tools around data visualization, for example. There was a lot of organizations that were using Power BI for data analysis. So I think there's just a lot of, different opportunities to help close the gap in the understanding when it comes to maybe implementation in particular.
Great. Does anyone have any maybe specific examples that they can share, like what are specific digital public goods that they might be using? And again, I'll just call on someone who's coming up in my little Zoom room. I see Kirsty Weisenbach from Connective. Kirsty, are you there? All right. Okay, next person on my screen then. Seth Akumani from UNDP. I know UNDP has been working quite a bit with DPG, so very curious to know what you guys are finding in specific DPGs you may be using.
Hi, Claudine. Yeah, sorry, I think I was on mute. Yes, we're UNDP. We've been doing some work on DPGs and in Ghana, working closely with UNICEF. So we started doing some work around evangelizing the usefulness of DPGs within the local innovation ecosystem. Through the UNICEF Startup Lab, we have over 10 potential DPGs that we're currently working with. So one of them has applied to the DG registry, and the others are in the process. So that's on the work done so far, which UNICEF Ghana has been leading, and we're starting to collaborate with them. On the advocacy side, we've had meetings with National Information Technology Agency and the ministry that's responsible for digitalization to start to look at how government can get more involved in also supporting e-governance and other digital initiatives that could form a strong foundation for others to build upon. We know that through digital public infrastructures that this current government has championed. For example, we have, a national digital ID system now. We also have digital public addressing system. There were fewer attempts before, but they weren't very widespread. But these two are now very well functioning, very efficient. In the financial sector, we also have the Bank of Ghana working closely with the Ministry of Finance to adopt open standards for mobile money interoperability. So all these things are contributing to making it easier for innovators to build digital public goods, and we are starting to champion a lot of that within the local innovation ecosystem. But additionally, also we're starting to engage more at the ministerial level in preparation for the UN General Assembly towards having some pledges that could serve as really strong goalposts for the work that we are doing. So just what I can share about our work so far on DPGs. Over.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Seth. And Kirsty, I see that you are back online. I know you wanted to share some thoughts, so Mike is all yours.
Hey, Julian. Yeah, my excuses. I had some technical difficulties. before. Well, with Connective, our company, we do generally from our tech side only build free and open software solutions. Where we do this relates a lot to supporting civil society organizations with community dynamic related platforms and applications. However, in our policy program and research team, so we advise a lot of public institutions, government institutions mainly, on their programming related to digital transformation in various thematic areas, reaching from governance to education, etc. And what we see most challenging is that programming lines, frameworks, and related funding structures often really struggle to adhere to the fundamental, let's say, aspects in terms of time frames, agility, and so that are needed in order to also on those levels structurally implement open source solutions.
Thank you. And I actually think that's a really great segue, unless anyone has any other examples of DPGs or open source systems that they're using. Maybe we can start, it's a great segue to then, like, if you bop over to the right side, to some of the challenges in using DPGs. And I posed some questions over here, but, just knowing what you know about DPGs, DPIs, what are some of the biggest challenges perhaps that you're facing that could be solved by increasing their use within a country's digital public infrastructure? Or even biggest challenges within digital development? What makes it hard to use or support open source? So all these questions right here, like, I would love to know. And as you write some stickies, I'll just call on maybe some of the more, some of the specific ones.
Hi, Claude.
Hey, Rhonda, good to have you.
Good. Yeah, as I said, I'm going to be driving, so please don't call on me to use the board.
Okay, fair enough. We'll have you just be a very eager observer.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so I see one sticky note here about government trusting and understanding the technology. So whoever wrote that, I would love to hear more about government trust specifically. So whoever wrote that, please unmute and share more thoughts.
That was me. I found specifically in previous roles that I've worked in that, oftentimes technology can be so hard to just articulate to funders, to the people using it. And then whenever you're looking at working with government officials in particular, who are oftentimes putting their political reputation and political will on the line for a technology, which, even though it might be a wonderful investment, oftentimes getting governments to make that commitment, I mean, that's hard as, from an implementer's perspective of having to also put kind of your backing and your trust in the tool that it's going to be successful. It's not going to make the government look bad. It's not going to erode citizens' trust in the government because the technology itself may break down. So I do think that the kind of economy of trust around technology and understanding and articulation and making sure that it's a good tool worth that trust and worth that investment is a huge uphill battle. But oftentimes with great return whenever all those things align and everything is able to function properly and ultimately build greater trust between citizens and government in the long term.
Great, thanks, Victoria. Does anyone else have any, thoughts about, trust in those different digital public goods or open source tech that we might be using? Anyone with experience on that?
I just like to second what that other person said. I'm doing some consultations right now with several governments in sub-Saharan Africa about the deployment of education technologies. And, one of the things that I'm noticing is that they are very much choosing their words carefully whenever they're saying stuff to me, because they know that it can be used in a report that's going to UNESCO. And I think that, we should not underestimate the vanity of officials. And I mean, we see that, even in high income countries, I don't think it's any different depending on the location. And so how can that be considered and not be seen as something bad? Because of course people want to look good. This is their job. So maybe thinking about mechanisms for, tying any of their work and how they can do it better, to also saying, well, if you do these things, if you follow these principles, this will help make you look good. So appealing to ego.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Rhonda. Thank you. And so I do see like a kind of related comment on that in the Miro about like just like lack of guidelines or procurement rules. So whoever wrote that, will you unmute yourself and also share?
Hi, it's Sebastian. Yeah, being part of a consultancy, we are really struggling on introducing the development of solutions into our tenders, because so far a lot of the evaluation is made on CVs and the experience and the production of goods as part of broader program, and especially digital products is sometimes separately, then you create a lack of integration. So it's really about having procurement rules which allow augmented delivery, where you've got a combination of human and machines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. So I also see a sticky on like the clarity on digital IP management. Basically asking who owns and protects the IP of DPGs. So I see Kirsty, you have your hand up, but whoever wrote that sticky, please elaborate, and then Kirsty, you can go ahead. So clarity on digital IP management.
It's me again. I'm really.
Oh, hello.
I've been working on drafting a white paper, so that's why I came with some questions. But the challenge we looked at is to ensure that when there are some DPGs, the IP is still managed, so nobody else is trying to claim the IP of a DPG, because open source still requires IP management. And having the IP to stay with the donor, for example, what FCDO is doing in systematically keeping the IP is fine, but there's an element of management when it's a DPG that's they allow through active IP management other donors to use those DPGs.
All right. Thank you. Kirsty, did you want to add to that or another comment?
Claudine, I have a comment.
Yes, go for it.
Yes, thank you very much. So on so the challenges, and this is based on the experience we've had in Sierra Leone currently, where when you talk about DPIs, realize that it involves much more collaboration between government institutions. However, on the very high level, we realize that there are no institutional frameworks when it comes to technology implementation or digital initiative implementation on the government level. So because government itself is not organized at that level, it makes it very difficult to come up with collaborative projects, such as looking at DPIs. So for me, one of the biggest challenges is around institutional frameworks of government on digitalization. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think my next question then to that, as well as the other challenges I'm seeing, are how are you all working around these barriers currently? and what are approaches you've tried, what worked, what hasn't worked. And so just to kick it off, I'll call on like one person who's showing up on my screen, Ciaran Barbour from FET.
Hi, Claudine. Yeah, I think we're, as an NGO, we, I think, are fairly early in the process of implementing open source technology. As a healthcare organisation, we're trying to design systems with OpenMRS, DHIS2, ComCare, etc. But I think we are struggling with the expertise at this level, and also as a global organisation working with different ministries of health, they all utilize different systems, so it's hard to implement programs in rural areas, for example, which also align with the national programs in each country, which I think is making it, difficult from a kind of sustainable point of view.
Yeah.
And it just means the capacity is not there for us to do that. So how we're getting around it at the moment is kind of why I'm here, because I guess we're struggling at that part. So unfortunately, I think you've came to me for the wrong question, I'm afraid.
I mean, all good. I think that in itself is one of the challenges, just like working with different systems. And I think that's something that we all struggle with, but would be eager to know from anyone else who else struggles with this, or any approaches that people have tried to, I guess, like fix it or make it a little bit better. And would also love to hear more about the sticky on like cybersecurity readiness. But before that, anyone who's worked with, disparate systems and how you're working around it.
Could I say something, Claudine?
Please do.
I still had my hand raised.
Oh yeah.
No, I also sorry. I wanted to say, like, I think the biggest problem we see in our work is that a lot of public administration, no matter on what level, is in many contexts around the world, is still getting crisp on how to digitalize internally. So before asking the ethical question on using open versus closed source solutions, there are a lot of different aspects people are struggling with. So whereas this is an opportunity, to where we have the chance to collaborate, to depart already from an open source mentality and solution introduction. In a lot of contexts, the gap to digitalize in any way is very, very big, where we talk about entire public administrations being still paper-based and whatnot. And just, having this transformation and thinking this through is already a huge thing. And I think in order to get to your question, to address this and how we deal with this is basically also always falling back on what we have all embraced and enshrined in the principles, to work in a very co-creative manner, which doesn't put tech solution idealism first, but really departs from case to case, working through context together with partners we work with, and then including different actor groups also into this process. So end users on public level, on the society level, and so on. Well, would require a concrete example perhaps to unpack this, and it would take too long. But to maybe keep a shot on how we address this is working consequently where possible with participatory and co-creative approaches throughout an entire project cycle.
Thank you. I was on mute. Thank you. And so I noticed that people, talk about just like different actors wanting the co-creative process. So perhaps an open-ended question, but as we look at all these problems that are up on the Miro board and that we've mentioned, from government trust, sustainability operations, cybersecurity readiness, like who outside of NGOs, digital development, who else is impacted by this problem? And I will, let's see, someone random, Musna from Stimson Center. Do you have any thoughts that you'd like to share? You might be on mute, but I see Sonib from IMF. Yeah, you have your hand raised.
Hi, Claudine. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm the one who wrote cybersecurity readiness, and perhaps I can elaborate just like our interest into learning more about DPGs and DPI. So at the IMF, I'm part of the Digital Advisory Unit, and then we are a unit that helps IMF country teams, most specifically the central banks and ministries of finance and governments as a whole about digitalization questions. And what we try to do is also to assess the digital readiness of countries before missions. So whether it could be missions on with central banks developing central bank digital currencies, or also helping assisting ministries of finance with their own digitalization and modernization processes. What we have encountered a lot is that no matter which kind of technology, whether if it's DPGs that are completely open source, or even like trying to advise governments developing their own technologies and softwares, is the kind of readiness that they have on the national level and also on the institutional level that can be a big problem. So it can be a problem of cost, of a problem of access to infrastructure, of ICT skills, and so on and so forth. But cybersecurity, we realized that this could be like the first low-hanging fruit that we could that needs to be addressed by countries and institutions, so that they can experience that they can have a bit more leverage and experience into trying different kinds of technologies that are publicly available and open source, because they provide lots of advantages, such as avoiding vendor lock-in and so on and so forth. So that was the one of the points that I wanted to raise. There are some interesting open source technologies that we found that that were of interest to some member countries, such as Mojaloop for payment interoperability, but also MOVSIP when developing digital like foundational digital identities. And we have seen in some country use cases that that it can be quite reliable. But to ensure this the trust towards DPGs, it's really about seeing or seeing countries understanding from other countries' experience just how they were able to use those DPGs and technologies available. So I think I can stop there and perhaps share more comments later on. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And then I see that Usna, you're back online. Did you have any thoughts you'd like to share about, like, you know, who are you working with that's also impacted by these common problems? Maybe the ways that you've tried to approach it as well, and what's worked.
Thank you so much, Claudine. And I apologize for my mic not working earlier. So actually, just to give you a bit of background. So currently right now, I'm not working in the DPG space, although I have previously with another company. So just to be very brief, the reason I joined this webinar was to understand more from a stakeholder perspective around what challenges are faced surrounding DPGs, and to learn more about it for my project, which is contributing to how to create principles to govern DPGs. But from my previous experience where I have worked in Pakistan with governing and regulating DPGs, what I found extremely interesting was the sort of dissonance that existed between the government and the private sector, especially fintechs and other companies, which try to create and then also develop and scale their DPGs or DPIs, and the amount of institutional challenges they face in terms of having facing high costs in terms of taxation, for instance, or not having the ability to reach out to too many stakeholders is something that I found to be an issue in developing economies such as Pakistan. And what I find is that then the consumers themselves would be impacted by these sort of barriers, which the government itself is putting into place. In the sense that the consumers then have to face these high costs, which the private sector is then transferring onto the consumers. So these are my brief remarks. I hope this was helpful to the discussion, and I look forward to hearing more from everybody else. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Anyone want to comment on that or have anything to just add in terms of challenges in the industry or your own work? And just looking back at our previous conversation about the current technologies, I did see, the humanitarian OpenStreetMap has like a number of open source technologies. Would love to, I'm assuming that's Petya who put that in there, but would love to hear more about like specific open source technologies other than the hot tasking manager, other examples, as well as, perhaps different challenges that you might have had in employing open source or things like that.
Hi, Kundin. Hi, everyone. Yes, I've added this one. I mean, there are multiple, I think, linked to like OpenStreetMap and specifically like OpenStreetMap technology. A lot of like the different like mobile applications that are built are following open source technologies. I think in terms of like challenges, maybe linking to that and what my role at the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap and something I've been reflecting is really some of the things that were mentioned around like sustainability of the models. And one of the things, again, I mentioned the tasking manager that we've been trying what we're calling a bit more of a collective approach, also in terms of like maintaining, open source technology, such as the tasking manager. So working a bit more closely with like the countries where those are used. So we're working with a partner in Nepal who is now doing a lot of the maintenance. And the other area where I'm really interested and kind of have been reflecting of how do we build that community of contributors. There's loads of people at different levels in terms of contributing to open source, whether it's like university students or more experienced people, but having that space where you have a bigger and more diverse contributor space. So I would say the kind of collective approach that we're trying is one of the spaces we're really trying to engage. So you don't have just the people who are building the technology and maintaining it and kind of keeping that, keeping that in place. I hope that answers the question.
No, it certainly does. Thank you so much. And again, that's a great segue to the next part of our discussion about opportunity. So as we're talking about things like, collective action, employing more cybersecurity readiness, like how could we start to do things differently? And I have some questions up here. So specifically thinking about your work or your organization, what opportunities could you contribute to, both in the short term? What are some of the low-hanging fruit, as well as the long term? And what do you actually need to be in place for you to be able to seize those opportunities? So go ahead, if you have access to a computer, please keep employing the Miro board, just jot down some thoughts. Otherwise, just jump in or use the raise hand function. And I'll give you all like a couple minutes to noodle on that. I see a comment here about capacity development, and from my experience, the way organizations or streams of work define capacity can be quite different. So whoever wrote that, can you be more specific on what kind of capacity is needed?
Oh, yes, it was me. So for capacity development, yes, I agree. Like the terms varies very differently between organizations. For us, it's more of a long-term perspective. It's also about bringing awareness of the latest capabilities in the industry, like the developments of some technology vendors, providers. It's also providing an unbiased perspective of views of some technologies, use cases. So it's just really long term.
Yeah. So what would you need to be in place to allow like, better opportunities for capacity development.
I think it should definitely be as many as stakeholders as possible, like for it to happen, like a good ecosystem, both from the public and private sectors, any kind of public-private partnerships, initiatives for collaborations, whether if it's hackathons, developing proof of concepts, design thinkings, really like an environment that fosters innovation from like very specific, like very at the conceptual level, from just sharing ideas to actually developing like a product or a project. Because I think it's as long as it fits like a bigger narrative, such as digitalizing a country or modernizing a specific ministry via the use of a particular technology, is either open source or developed in-house or bought or from via software as a service, this kind of stuff.
Okay, thank you. So as you're all continuing to write down thoughts, I'm going to again go back to the Zoom room, see who's next on my list. And I see Sanyukta Sharma.
Yes, hi everyone. So I was just actually observing and, understanding what everyone is sharing. I don't have specific thoughts as such, but yeah, I'm just trying to, grasp and learn and just hear all the thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. But I'm really enjoying this conversation and learning a lot about DPGs and DPIs in the ecosystem.
Yeah, I think, as we're forming the charter, I think we're all kind of trying to learn, together about the different opportunities. So yeah, Ransford.
Great, thanks everyone. Thanks, Claudine. Yeah, so I had a comment on the capacity development, and this was more like to connect it with something that we are currently working on in Sierra Leone, where we realized that we needed to build the capacity of lead government IT practitioners on one specific framework, which is enterprise architecture, and said that governments could get into the mindset of interoperability. So with that process, the plan then is to connect the acquired knowledge to a specific DPG product, which is the X-Road, where then we'll create a platform for data exchange. So then for us, what will be required in order to make this, because currently this is live instructor-led capacity building program, which may not be scalable. So one thing that will really need support on will be to have a platform where some of these curated learning materials are available, which directly links to the DPG products and content, so that based on the knowledge you acquire, you can easily pick the DPG tools and be able to connect them into various layers and then be able to achieve the DPIs that we are all heading towards. So those are my initial thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ransford. Yes, Rhonda? I don't think your mic is working.
Clearinghouse, but also being the source for all things data science for social impact. So in the past few months, I've been having conversations with various governments in low and middle income countries. And one of the things that continues to be a common refrain in terms of the needs they have is related to building not only their data literacy, but their data capacity. So been suggested to help them create data labs, help them do a lot of the trainings that you're mentioning. And as you know, probably, there's a lot of shared knowledge that should be imparted to governments in this area that has overlaps with the general public. But as we talked about earlier, there are probably other aspects as well that need to be added to that. So if for anyone who is interested in kind of looking at the data capacity and government space and already working on projects or digital public goods in this area, and you're interested in having data.org host them and promote them, this is something that we can certainly do, and please feel free to get in touch with me.
And just so everyone knows, Rhonda as well as Liliana in the call are part of the Digital Principles Advisory Council. So really anything that you might need in regards to, like data or, government work, they'd be excellent points of contact. But I see another sticky note in the Miro about clear regulations. Can whoever wrote that please elaborate more on what, maybe specific regulations or just like how that is impacting, lack of regulation might be impacting your work right now?
Thanks, it's Sebastian. Yeah, I wrote about clear regulations pretty much in terms of understanding how people can contribute fairly and really work in terms of having regulations which enable fairness and transparency, because there's some potential conflict of interest in terms of the potential commercial benefits regarding creating DPGs, and also on which terms people can intervene. So having clear regulations would set a benchmark and provide also some risk mitigations, because some people might be interested to invest and contribute, but without clear regulations, this brings some kind of risk and can discourage capable and professional people to invest. So it was much more having clear regulation in the sense of regulation to mitigate risk and bring fairness.
Thank you, Sebastian, very helpful. And so just to pull quickly, before we move on to our last section for the final 30 minutes, because I know people have to drop, I know we were talking a lot about like the need to collaborate and, build up, more government capacity, as well as opportunities there. So I'd love to just quickly pull some thoughts from Liliana, who's on the call. She works for the government of Colombia. So would love to hear from her about different, needs or opportunities that you might see and what you need in place to seize those opportunities. Okay, we might have lost Liliana, but if she happens to join back, I'll move us all to like the last section. So just kind of for the last 30 minutes, just like wrap up thoughts. And we've already touched on this a little bit, but just drilling down more specifically into not only your organization, like what does your organization need, but your partners or whoever you're working with, because they might be quite different. What else do you think could help like solve these challenges or address the needs? And again, quite similar to what we had just talked about with opportunities, but just drilling down into more specifics. So I see like raising awareness, advocacy has been added on here, but what else? Or if you'd like to talk more about awareness, we can drill down in that too. Okay, so I see comments. So in addition to raising awareness, tangentially related about getting local stakeholders to understand the economic value of DPGs. So I guess I would love to open the conversation to, how do we better advocate for DPGs? And I guess any suggestions people might have, what have you tried? Again, like what has worked, what hasn't worked, and how can we best lay that path forward to talking about DPGs? So I guess I'll just call then on Serkan, who actually wrote that sticky note. Would love to hear about like your experience with getting, your local stakeholders or partners to understand the intrinsic value, as well as maybe elaborate more on physical infrastructure.
I mean, maybe the example I'm using and referring sometimes about digital public good we've developed about some school attendance tracking systems, which were digital both in South Sudan and in Tanzania, where the government recognized that having those APIs in place in those systems helps them to have accurate information in terms of school attendance and also teacher presence, and helps them to fix economic problems like school fees, teachers' salaries, and to obtain better support. And through those DPGs, they can also have some reliable information on the strengths and improvement of their school systems, which is a valuable asset.
Thank you. Does anyone else share this problem or have had success in engaging local stakeholders around this? And Sebastian, I'm not sure if you're speaking. It shows that your mic is lighting up, but we cannot hear you.
I wasn't, but no.
Okay.
I guess spoken more than enough.
Just checking. All right. Well, I think the needs and opportunities were pretty closely related. But I think we did get a lot of good conversation going around capacity needs, advocacy needs, things like that. But I think this will all the conversation today is really going to well inform the white papers as well as the shape of the DP Charter going forward. So perhaps Chrissy or Victoria, and I see Kay has joined as well. Any closing thoughts or questions before we conclude our first Pulse on the Principles roundtable?
Thanks, Claude. I just want to thank everyone. And Chrissy, I'll let you say some final words too, but I know you're in a coffee shop. But I want to thank everyone for your thoughtful contributions. This has been a really interesting discussion. And, as we said at the top of the conversation, a lot of these insights are really going to be directly informing our white paper documents, which I'm sure we'll share with the other folks that are on this call. But please keep in touch and send us anything that you think would be relevant. After this conversation, Claude will also disseminate a survey, which we'll be using to also, if maybe you had some other thoughts that you think of afterwards or that you weren't able to include, we'd love to reflect those in the white paper as well. But Chrissy, Kay, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'll just also say thank you, and also put a seed in the back of your heads, especially for those of you working with governments, and maybe you have a big idea that you don't quite have enough political will to implement at this point. We're looking at those kind of projects as we look towards really driving commitments towards the charter. So something to think about. No need to answer today, but would love to hear from you in the future if we can support. And I'm sorry again for the background noise. But thank you again for your time and look forward to being in touch.
Okay, thank you everyone. So this was really the first roundtable. Thank you for joining, being a part of not only the principals community, but being part of informing the DPG Charter movement. But we'd love to host more roundtables and discussions and see, how we can make these like a lot more dynamic in the future. So I'm sure you all know how to contact me, whether it's through Twitter or email. So if you have anything that you'd love to discuss with the community, let me know. Would love to co-host one of these roundtables with you. But in the meantime, everyone enjoy the rest of your week, and we will see you all online. Bye, everyone.
And thank you so much, Claude. This is awesome.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.